Hello?
Hey, Rich, it's Larson. You got a minute?
Sure, Larson, what's up?
Hello and welcome to the Got a Minute podcast with Larson Hicks and Pastor Rich Lusk. Hey, Rich, how are you today?
Yeah, great to be with you, Larson.
Likewise, I am excited about today's episode. We've been waiting to have a bona fide. Well, this is actually, I feel like this is two politicians in a row. We had Dr. Mike Munger in North Carolina, economist, but also frequent candidate, I think libertarian or constitutional party candidate for governor.
Yes, but has he ever been elected of anything?
I don't think so.
This is our first elected.
Yes,
politician.
Good point. Yes, big important distinction. So we've got and Ernie here. This is Ernie Yarborough, House District 7 representative in Alabama, and we're excited to have you on the show, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking me. I'm very excited. I know it took a hot minute to get this to work out, but these kinds of conversations to me are really exciting because I feel like that I've learned so much, just in this short time. And I feel like that the Church of the Lord Jesus is in a historic place for opportunities. And there's some things that maybe we can learn through some of these shared experiences to get, viable and godly candidates out there, which I hope I'm both. So anyway.
Well, you and I met, just to back up really quick, you and I met, I think it was through the Stronghold conference that Rich spoke at. Like Rich says, that's the time when he and Vodi Bakum packed out.
We did.
Venue.
Both of us, but we did it.
You did. Hey, it takes a team.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
That was January 2021. So it's been a few years. But that's where I first feel like you and I connected. Maybe we connected before that. You'll have to correct my memory, but that's when we met face to face, and I kind of learned about your involvement. You've been very heavily involved with Pastor George Grant over the years, publishing a lot of his work. How'd you end up running for office? Like, maybe give us that.
Yeah. So sure. So as a growing up as a homeschool child, it's kind of funny. You're like red meat for Republican door knocking. Yeah. And so, because you can put two sentences together and articulate, and I was raised reading, Patrick Henry, Blackstone's commentary on the law, Constitution, all that stuff, and loved it. So, I never thought until COVID hit that this would ever be on the radar as far as running for office, but always had a passion for, faith and freedom and politics and our history. And so, actually ended up as a child, knocked doors with John Wall. We grew up, grew up together, and now he's the chairman of the Republican Party of the whole state of Alabama. So, the Lord moves in mysterious ways to providences, and was it Bilbo or one of those wagons, and said you have to be careful putting your foot out your door. You have no idea where it's going to go. You don't. Right. And I think Doug Wilson said one time, it's not the little decisions you make are the ones that end up being like, how in the world did that lead to this? But anyway, so fast forward to COVID. So I live in Lawrence County, District 7, as you said, House District 7, which is like super conservative. We like a lot of conservative districts, we have this weird conglomeration of Jesus, football, guns, don't tax me, but I like an occasional government handout, right? And so there's this weird conglomeration of these things there's strange bedfellows, right? So, but there I was, born there, raised there, and so during COVID, my wife is kind of like an Amazon warrior babe for freedom. So, and my dad has got a long history of fighting for freedom and suffered for it as well. So COVID comes along, and we have a state rep who he ran on. I wasn't super involved in following the local elections as nearly as I should have been, which is my fault. It's a big lesson. Hope we can learn from all this. Yeah. So the state representative that we had, he ran on a low tax, low government overreach platform, was going into churches and making a big deal of it. And then he goes down to Montgomery. Within the first 2 weeks, he votes for the largest, the gas tax, right? The largest tax increase, right? And then he twice brought legislation that would have put every gun owner in the state of Alabama in a gun database. Not because they committed a crime, robbed a bank, shot Granny in the foot. No, it was for having a gun permit, which that of itself, he was also against constitutional carry until he had to be for it. But that's a separate. Anyway, so those were all frustrating to me. And then kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was his position on the COVID vaccine. And, saying multiple times, get the jab or lose your job. And if you've seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, you remember where he and the French dude are trying to get recruits, and Mel says, "Hey, let's go to this tavern here." Like, monsieur, are you sure? He's like, "Yeah, this is the perfect place." So he goes in and he opens the door and yells, "God save King George!" Right, and the whole place just stops and looks at the door, and he closes the door, and all the knives stick in the door. Right, so saying things like "get the jab or lose your job" in Lawrence County is like opening the door and yelling, "God save King George!" Right, it's just not a good idea. Yeah. Right, so. Myron and I talked about it, prayed about it, met with some friends of ours who are involved in the state in various ways, and we decided to run. And so, in praying through all of that, I'd never run for any office ever, and it was a state representative. It's like, why not, go for a city council or I don't know, official trash pickup guy or something. I don't know, whatever. We just jumped in a bigger race, and so. I took counsel from folks who had ran some successful races, got put in touch with the most conservative, to my knowledge, most conservative and most successful campaign manager in the state. And so in praying over, like, I need a good theme, right? A good slogan. And the Lord just gave it to me. It was "Make Alabama Local Again." And so I thought, that's it. Local liberties, local rights, and local responsibilities, right? We got to craft a message that not only promotes our local rights, but let's lean into taking responsibility again for our communities, right? So that's really why that's what led to me running. And, the race itself was interesting because I knocked 6,000 doors. And so when you knock that many doors, first of all, I had a gun drawn on me. But the guy he didn't know, like, he was like, Billy Bob Bucktooth, and so I'm like, "Hey man, I love your gun, Second Amendment all the way." He's like, "Oh, okay." He puts the gun away, and it was a great conversation. For about 6.3 seconds, I sort of squinched up a little bit.
Politics is dangerous.
It is dangerous, especially when people emotions were raw after COVID. People were mad. People had lost loved ones. So, there were some places I just cried with people and prayed. And, I left giving them my little little card, but at that point, it felt like it was even wrong to ask them for a vote because, but just knocking that many doors, man, so many people said, my grandpa is the last person I remember knocking doors asking for a vote. And, man, this is amazing. And the great conversations that we had, and a lot of yellow dog Democrats were like, "I'm voting for you." They said, because, like, I love what you talk about and the old ways, and you come knocking my door, and I don't agree with the Democrat Party of today. And just that whole experience was one that, I could tell you an hour of stories of hilarious, sobering, serious, funny, tears. I'll never forget. And so it was incredible. That journey was amazing.
Tell me, thanks for giving us the rundown. I think it's amazing that you started your political career at like 40 without having done any previous, political office at all. And you went straight for state representative. Can you, what does a state representative do in Alabama? Like, what's
Sure.
the role entail?
Yeah. So the role, there are 105 state house districts in Alabama. There are 35 state senate, right? So it's like 3 times as many state house positions. So a senator covers about three times as much area as a state rep does. So the state representative, so our session in Alabama is every year, basically from like February to middle of May. So it is 105 calendar days or 30 legislative days. So the way a typical week unfolds is I go down on Monday evening, and then Tuesday and Thursday are the legislative days, and Wednesday is the committees, right? So think about it. Two legislative days per week, Tuesday and Thursday, times 15 gets you to 30 legislative days, or 15 times 7 is 105 calendar days. So your first job, of course, is to be there during session. And then on Wednesdays, you're in the committees. And so you're not only helping get bills to the floor by passing them through committee, but you are on the floor voting, and you're on the floor going to the well, where there's two podiums, right? And you're speaking for or against. The whole process of how a bill gets to that point, interestingly enough, and this when we get into transparency and how do we hold our elected officials accountable, there's multiple phases a bill has to go through to get to where you can actually have it on the floor, which also ironically means there are multiple places where Republicans can kill bills and never let them see the light of day and provide cover for themselves that, well, it just didn't make it to the floor. We ran out of time. Yeah. Right. So now outside of session, right, your job back home is, so every session we get what's called educational community service grant dollars. So that gives you this pool of money each rep has, and you can allot that in various ways. And so I allot a lot of that. There's good projects with fire departments and stuff, and then I give a lot of it to our schools, but they hold it for me as a grant writing pool of money, so I can make sure that, because my goal there is to make sure that the money goes to grassroots movements, teachers, needs, and I also can couple that with other good things like with Make Alabama Local again. Well, how does that work out? Well, when I'm not there, I'm thinking, okay, when I do stuff, I'm playing three-dimensional chess. So I didn't even tell the story about one of the hurdles you have to overcome is the local Republican Party, because the love of power and the cliques and the good old boy institutions, like, that's a real thing, y'all. You talk about being an outsider, which I was, but I focused on winning the hearts of the people, and that's what made the difference by the blessing of God. So three-dimensional chess. When I do something, I'm thinking, number one, it's the right thing to do. Number two, will it platform people in my district to embrace a role of leadership to serve, so that I can get out of the way? They don't need me, right? I'm not inculcating in the minds of the people it's all about me, right? Because it's not. Yeah. And the third thing is, if I want to run again, how will this affect running again? Not as a career politician, but as we're in this weird place where if you're going to have principled, committed, godly people who are fighting for truth and righteousness, you're going to have not only the liberals, you're going to have their Republican establishment come after you. Okay, so you got to think about how you can remove their power to remove consistently good conservative people from office. So, for example, Make Alabama Local again, one of the local grant writing groups. I said, hey, let's do this. I had all these people come and complain, old folks, I can't cut my grass, I can't trim my bushes, I'm down in my back, I need help. The little towns didn't have the money to pay their workers extra time, didn't have the resources. So there's several grant writing places. I got with one of them. He had a vision for this idea of a foundation already. He wrapped their trailer with their foundation logo. TVA filled it with yard tools. And now we're about to launch a program where we get with teachers, parents, football, basketball players, students, and we're picking out 20 homes per town. And we're going to go and service their yards, cut their grass. Some of the dads do construction, so they're going to take some of the young kids. Hey, this home needs a ramp. So we're going to teach you how to design and build this ramp from the ground up, right? And when you go through some of these local grant writing places, they have volunteer forms that everybody can sign that gives you insurance, coverage. Got to cover your tail in case somebody gets hurt or whatever, right? So it's looking for things like that outside of session where you're platforming your people, bring young people in, right? We laugh about the joke about, that the anti-theft deterrent to, Gen X stealing a car is a stick shift, right? I mean, it's funny, but it's also sad because it means nobody ever taught them, right? So platform, bring people in, make their skills, let their skills and gifts and callings be called out or shine, right? And it's just been amazing to watch that, because as God has given us ideas and wisdom, and people's response to that, they love it.
Yeah.
And you find out people have been used to leadership. That's all about that person. And it's not. It shouldn't be that way. So you're doing the right thing. You're platforming other people. And then third, it provides you all the cover in the world, which is why I think I'm very, very popular in my district.
Ernie, what was your background before you, but like, can you tell us about your career kind of prior to deciding to go into office, and are you still like, what are you into still?
Well, before I get that, I want to circle back on one thing, and that is this is an important lesson that I think church-going Reformed people miss. That I missed. I had to learn this about how to be successful in this level of politics, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about who has the most conservative platform, right? It's not just about who has the best talking points.
Right.
I've told Myra 100 times, we need to pray that God will help us to fall in love with our district like Jesus loves the church.
Yeah.
Warts and all, which means, and this is where I think conservatives and Republicans miss a golden opportunity, because the people know, like in my district, Bama's going to have almost all conservative-ish districts. They're going to know that you're given all the bullet points of the proper talking points, right? And you can even give those and vote opposite of that in a large degree. You could cover your tail just by using the talking points. But if you are actually conservative and you get in the well and you speak against leadership when leadership is not conservative and they're wrong, right? And I could tell y'all some great stories, man. People were ticked off. It was great. I loved it. So, but I quoted Mark Twain and Steen. Anyway, but if you love your people in unusual ways and you serve them in unusual and you platform them in unusual ways, they will love you for it. Yeah. But you've got to take the initiative to take that ideology to your district. So that's all I'll say on that for now. But what I do now, so my background, I grew up in a home. My dad was self-employed, so I grew up helping him wire homes. And then back in the early to mid 90s, when the electronic ballots first came out, like you can see right there, those 2x4 fluorescent lights, right?
Yeah.
So when electronic ballots first came out, we traveled the whole country, putting in electronic ballots, taking the T12, T8 light bulbs. So I grew up having like a hands-on hard work electrical background, working some night shifts and stuff, and then with my dad's business. And then I eventually went into electrical engineering at what we call UCLA, which is the University of Calhoun alongside the airport. And that's right. And so then from 2 years there to UAH in Huntsville, graduated in my degree in electrical engineering and worked at Nucor Steel for about 10 years. And now I'm self-employed as a software engineer, primarily writing software for mobile applications on your smartphone. So that's kind of my background. I was homeschooled my whole life. My wife was too. And then we have 4 kids and we also homeschool.
That's great, Ernie. And I really do agree with you. I think for a civil magistrate of any sort to do well, he has to have a love for his people and his place. And that's got to be communicated. Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned is the Republican establishment and dealing with them. One thing that I've heard is that in states in the U.S. that basically function as one-party states because one party is very dominant, a lot of times that party actually does not reflect the desires of the people in the state because there's not really there's no competition and there's very little accountability. Have you seen that kind of thing in our state where the fact that people can kind of, check off the conservative boxes, they can use the conservative talking points and kind of satisfy people, but then they may not go down to Montgomery and implement that kind of agenda? How do you see that playing out in our state?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is the case. And the ultimate kicker there is the fact that the people have either not known how or not cared to figure out how to hold their elected officials accountable. Now, part of that is because I think we lack the church-going folk lack the ability to start with a principle and bring application, but that's a function of the ministry under which they sit. But yeah, the way that it works in Alabama politics, without a doubt, is lobbyist. So, for example, let's take the IVF situation as an example. So IVF, right? Obviously, we're pro-family, but we're pro-family because we're pro-life as believers, as Christians, right? And so that, of course, means that life begins at conception. And from conception to natural cause of death, no life should be unjustly destroyed, right? And so, but here comes UAB with all this money, and based on the righteous ruling of the Supreme Court of Alabama, knee-jerk reaction, if you look at, why do you think that, for example, the guy who's the chair of the health committee got $60,000 from Pfizer for his campaign?
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't because he parted his hair nicely and loves Jesus, right? It's because he has a position to. One of the ways you kill a bill, right, before it ever sees the light of day is if a chairman doesn't pick a bill to have a committee hearing, the bill's dead, right? So there's multiple points where either the lobbyists affect individual representatives, they affect chairmanship positions, right, by offering of money, by negotiation of political favors or trading this for that. And all of that happens because that's why it took forever for us to get constitutional carry. Like, why in the world did it take so long? And was it so hard for Alabama to get constitutional? It's crazy. Well, but the answer is because you have various interests who actually are not conservative at all. The head of you remember the article 1819 News came out. They blew the story on it, where the head of the Alabama Sheriff's Association talked about wanting to constitutionally change the Second Amendment. When that came out, people of Alabama, that basically ensured that con carry was going to get passed. So you have these associations that sound like they should be pro-American, pro-liberty. You have these lobbyist groups of money that are actually, they're anti-American, they're anti-liberty, they're anti-freedom, and we have to learn to stop assuming good about them, because any institution, when left to itself with money and power, is going to corrupt. Right. If people do not hold them accountable, this is your principles. This is what you say you believe. So IVF, what happens? They say, hey, this is not going to work out. All this money is with IVF, and we make all this money. We do all this research. So they count on a knee-jerk reaction. They get a knee-jerk reaction. Here comes legislation that says we're going to give blanket immunity to IVF facilities for destruction of embryos, right? Blanket immunity, right? And so, not cool to me. Long story short, draft an amendment, get on the floor, and I give a speech where I quote Jack Reacher, the Bible, and Vanilla Ice. I end up on national news, and I'm one of two no votes, right? And so, but when I talked to the UAB doctors the day before, wearing the lab coats, I said, oh yeah, we want to destroy embryos if we think that they're going to maybe be special needs. What? And then you're like, well, and then you ask them, well, are you pro-choice or pro-life? Oh, we're pro-choice, like right to your face.
Yeah.
You're like, and then you hear Republicans. This would blow you. I can get you some links for people to watch. You can watch on the floor of the House and Senate where Republicans in Alabama are saying, I don't know when life begins.
Wow.
You didn't put that on your mailers, right? And then I bring my amendment that says no immunity shall be granted to any individual who intentionally destroys the life of a preborn child, right? That language ties into our existing law that Alabama recognizes life at conception, right? We passed a constitutional amendment, right, as a state with 2018 or whatever, right? And so my amendment gets killed on the floor. A Democrat gets up, a lawyer. I love his name. His name is Prince Chestnut. He's got an amazing name, and so. Sounds like he should be like in some part of like an Eddie Murphy Coming to America movie or something. I don't know. He's a great guy. And he's like, he said, I want to bring Yarborough's amendment back. That's a good amendment. He said, what? He said, so no protections blanketed. What about the woman? And so anyway, he just went after the sponsor of the bill, in the Senate, off the record, the guy carrying the bill is like, we shouldn't even be carrying this. So he's challenged like, well, then why are you carrying it? So you're giving in to pressure. You're giving in to threats of power or money, right? Because and then after it's all said and done, when the bill passes and it goes to the governor's desk to be signed, Alabama Policy Institute, ALCAP, which is like all the Baptist churches of the state of Alabama, Students for Life, all the Southern Baptists, all these groups write a letter and send it to the governor and say, please veto this bill. I was right. Ben Harrison was right. But it's like the whole gambling thing, which this is a hilarious. The state executive committee of Alabama, Republican, just voted by a 3/4 majority to pass a resolution condemning gambling. It's like, this is great. We can get into that topic later. But the point being is that it's because you've got when you have Republican leadership leading the charge on gambling, leading the charge on blanket immunity for the destruction of embryos of life. Yeah. Right? When you've got them leading the charge on these things, it's because they're being influenced by other realities. And it's because we don't know, or we don't functionally operate as a people in how we hold our elected officials accountable. Yeah. Two things. You get on the Secretary of State's website and you see who gives them money and you look at their voting record. That's all you need. That's all you need.
Walk us through it. I mean, it's fascinating and frustrating to hear that. It's interesting with IVF, and we did a whole episode of this podcast on IVF talking about it. You had the Supreme Court ruling, which was masterful. Really, I mean, it looked like a really good ruling to me, and just reading it, it was impressive. And then, it's like within a week, it's kind of all done. It's undone by the state legislature. So it was frustrating to see that.
Well, and the thing is, there's a pro-life way to do IVF, right? So right. Dr. Grant put me in touch with Dr. Joy Riley. She's the head of bioethics and culture for Tennessee. And she goes to all these bioethics conferences and speakers. She co-authored a book called Outside the Womb. There's ways to do it, right? But the problem is that I guarantee you it is less profitable.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, absolutely. Because you're not fertilizing all these eggs just to discard.
That's right. You're saying, well, actually, these are probably not viable. And then you would hear Republicans, in order to justify their vote, Republicans started in pronouncing pro-choice arguments. Well, it's not viable. One guy said, well, it's not viable, it's not, until it's implanted in the uterus. I said, it's funny you say that. So as the Democrat pointed out to the sponsor of the bill on the floor, he said, you understand that you're introducing, this is unconstitutional. 14th Amendment, equal protection. It doesn't depend on their geographical location. But on top of that, I said, you understand that you're introducing an idea that's going to require you to ban all forms of birth control, which ironically, we don't use modern birth control. That's how I got 4 kids, or 8 as the case may be, right? But because Randy Alcorn had this masterful book he wrote as a pastor, talking about his journey as a pastor, right? And how he began to look at the issue. And he began to study the physician's desk reference guide, and it turns out they basically all purge the uterine wall. And so it's like, so there's no safe point where you can try to protect your pro-life credentials and be whatever the establishment tells you to be. There's really only one of two choices. Either life begins at conception and we protect it, or we're just going to pick and choose at what stage we can destroy life based on what's convenient for us. That's good.
I mean, I'm so glad, that we have somebody in office in our state who has that kind of moral clarity about the issue, because I think so many Christians are lacking that kind of moral clarity about this particular issue. And you see it with, the IVF thing is a great example of that. You could talk about hormonal birth control, as well. Let me give you another test case to kind of walk us through. Talk about the school choice situation in Alabama.
Yeah. So that's a good one. So when I came into office, obviously I'm still a freshman legislator. It's a 4-year term. I'm halfway through my first 4-year term. So my very first session, so each time you go to Montgomery for 3 months, it's called a session. So there's 4 sessions for a 4-year term. So that first session, I carried the school choice bill in the House. My senator, who's an amazing senator, Dr. Larry Stutz, he carried it in the Senate. We pushed and pushed. We got a committee hearing. We debated on it, and for me, the reason why school choice was it took a little bit of courage, by the grace of God, to because you're always thinking, well, how is this going to affect, politically speaking, me and my district? Because I got a lot of public schools, teachers, So the angle that as I prayed about it, like, why is school choice even important? And the Lord just gave me a clarity of thought, and it was really cool to see the second session. The governor was now all of a sudden the champion of school choice, and that bill was eventually passed. But for me, the reason why school choice was important. So as I talked to teachers, even in the public schools, teachers, principals, superintendent, overwhelmingly, like, they want prayer back. They want prayer back in schools. They want the Bible in schools. They're actually super burdened and concerned for these kids. So my point to them was, look, why do you think, functionally speaking, we don't have those things? And the answer is because it's about who sits at the financial table. So for me, school choice was a way, in the free market, right? They always end up listening to their most vital stakeholders. That always happens, right? Without fail. So parents have to actually have a real seat at the financial table. Because when you can yank somebody by the financial short hairs, right, like, they're going to pay attention. And right. So my point to them was, this may be the only way to actually save public schools. Because what do you think is going to happen if public schools keep getting the libtard, filthy, perverse, nasty trash books? All the good, godly, even common sense folk are pulling their kids out. And right. All you're going to have left is the kids who are the challenged kids or the problem kids or whatever, whose parents don't care and just want to use public school as a, babysitting apparatus. So the reality is, the only way you could actually even have a hope and a prayer of turning public schools back is to force a seat at the table for parents. So that was my whole process, fundamentally, because I believe if that happens, if that genuinely and truly happens, you will see the public schools and the local school boards begin to get courage to push back on these things. Because what angers me about the state legislature is, if we don't do our job to protect laws and go to fight and go to war for our schools and our people and their liberties and freedoms, medical freedom, school freedom, textbooks, curriculum, all the stuff that we don't like, that's not good, is self-inflicted wounds because we take government handouts. So it's our job as the state legislature to draw a line in the sand and say, heck no, right? We will be a firewall for our people. We will not abdicate, because if you abdicate your duty, then what happens? You put your superintendents, your principals, your teachers, your parents, you put them in an impossible situation, right? So case in point, look at the border, federal immigration. When the federal government doesn't do its constitutionally sworn duty, you bring living hell to your people, right? And then we're left to have to deal with the ramifications of that and try to figure out how we're supposed to handle it. Same thing with school choice and our schools. So I don't know if you saw, was in the last few months, the Oklahoma state superintendent came out and said, forget the federal government. We're teaching Bible in Oklahoma public schools, and we're getting all the federal dollars out, right? This is the great conundrum and the great crisis to which all of this is headed. You name it, immigration, abortion, school choice, it's all headed to one central location, and that is the assertion of states' rights. Either we're going to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, we are done being politically prostituted. Right? We are done being your political whores for the destruction of our children and our families and our faith and our freedom. And we will not, our founding fathers, what did they say? Lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, right? And my question is, what is God calling us in Alabama to offer, to sacrifice, to do? Is there anything that we're willing to sacrifice in order to get an ROI that has a future? And that's the conundrum, and that's the question. And it's not, the federal government has spoken, so all we can do. No, all we can do is say, you know what? We're not for sale. We need a big sign over our state that says not for sale. And we have to lead in the state legislature and be willing to say, how many Republicans have said on the floor of the House, and I brought an amendment to a good adoption bill. Hey, you know what? We're not going to do adoption and foster care placement based on a family's vaccination status. Forget that. First thing out of a Republican's mouth, this could jeopardize federal funding, and I move to table the amendment. You know, why? Because you are a political prostitute. Like, let's just say it what it is. The problem in Alabama, the problem in the Southeast ain't the Democrats. It's not. You know, behind the Republican Party is a constituency that needs to learn how to send people to office and hold them accountable. And that's probably more than you asked for, but it affects everything.
Yeah, that's really exactly what I was asking for. I mean, it is really interesting to me, you know, to hear you lay all that out. And how far do you take that in terms of rejecting federal funds? I mean, obviously that impacts education.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a good point on that. So we have an amazing attorney general in Alabama, Steve Marshall. His chief counsel, Catherine Robertson, gave the freshmen our very first session. She gave a phenomenal economic 101 presentation to the freshmen. Her whole presentation was on states' rights and state sovereignty. And she made this point that I thought was very profound. She said, when we go against the federal government and our state departments walk in lockstep together, we have won every single lawsuit or case, and we've kept the money. Because ultimately it's our money, right? So, but we have to walk as a unit. So there is a path forward, right, to even bring what is rightfully ours back to us. Yeah. While at the same time realizing that number one, we have to be unified in principle, but number two, our first mentality should be that we handle our own problems, right? And it's because, like, it's just it's a functional reality that you cannot give away. You cannot keep giving away your responsibilities without giving away your authority.
Yeah.
Because then even functionally, you build functional construction dependence into your infrastructure.
Yeah.
And there can't not be some level of collateral damage,
right,
should you fix the problem at that point. Now, we're getting to a point in America where the collateral damage is going to be worth it to a lot of people because they're not willing to pay the price of their future.
Right. Well, it's you. I think something you just said there is so incredibly profound and bears repeating. You said you cannot keep giving away your responsibilities without giving away your authority. And I've heard to state it in a different way. I've heard Doug Wilson say many times that authority flows to those who take responsibility, which is another way to say exactly what you're saying. But I think we've one of the reasons I'm a big advocate for starting your own business, even if it's a small side hustle with your kids or whatever, or volunteering to serve in church leadership, or, you know, find a place where you can take some responsibility for something. Is that this, I think that muscle of responsibility and leadership and ownership and authority is totally atrophied by most of us today. Most modern Americans are employees who think about their paycheck as almost a human right, you know, and there's this sense that, you know, my employer is somehow defrauding me if I'm not getting, you know, bonuses and raises and upward mobility in my career, you know, because I just deserve that because I'm a human being that occupies a desk. And it's like just this idea that, like, actually, if you take responsibility, if you solve problems, authority comes to you. It comes to you. This is how God's designed the universe.
That's right. Yeah, authority flows to those who serve, right? And that's why, like I mentioned earlier, about platforming people in my district to walk out their skill set. Well, that then authority flows to them. They realize that, and then they also realize that, you know, by me, you know, Proverbs talks about that there is that which withholds more than is proper, and it leads to poverty, right? But that a person who, I'm kind of using like a Message Bible interpretation here, but a person that walks with an open hand leads to prosperity, right?
Mhm.
So when you lead with an open hand, where you serve, and you necessarily in doing so platform other people, a rising tide raises all ships, right? And when people begin to sense that, like now you're empowering people in a godly way to feel powerful and strong to make a difference. And that's the building in that mentality of this could jeopardize federal funding is destructive and crippling on so many levels, because it also it's like taking a fire hydrant to the foundations of the internal thought processes, character building, the mental and spiritual fortresses that need to be in our hearts in order to be those kinds of people who earn the promotions.
Well, you're also undermining your ability to argue for lower taxes, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all paying insane income tax to the IRS, but you don't really get to argue that's unfair or unreasonable if you have no idea how much authority and how much you're outsourcing, to the federal
Mm-hmm.
government to run and control for you.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I
think if you don't want to take on the role of service, as a community, but you demand this from somewhere, there's very few options left to you outside of, we're gonna, like the Old Testament and Saul, we're gonna take your sons and daughters, we're gonna tax, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z,
right?
And all of a sudden now you have lost local control,
right? Yeah, I'm eager to. I mean, this is one of those things. Rich and I have talked about this so many times on the podcast. This frustration, and I have it with myself. So I'll point at myself first. But we've sort of been trained as Americans to be obsessed with federal politics, with DC, with mainstream media. And completely oblivious to local politics, completely unaware, completely uninterested, and yet we feel justified that we can just be outraged about all the things that are happening in DC. How do we? I mean, obviously something changed for you, Ernie, to get you off your butt and involved. How do we get more of our? Because I know so many really, really sharp, well-educated, competent people, in our church community that could make a huge impact if they just picked something, to serve in. How do we get people there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So number one, we need pastors and men in the church who believe this is important. And even if that means they have to be gloriously inconsistent with their eschatology, right? We need people who are willing to say this is prioritized. It's important. One of the reasons why I think we lose politically is because the opposition is much more structured. They're much more intentional and purposeful. So I think where it needs to start is, like, I think it would be great for churches to have a gathering of men who sit down and make a political plan. First of all, you have to know, hey, like, what's local government like? Oh, we have a city council. Of a mayor. Well, when do they meet? Right? Well, can we go to those meetings? Right? Or do we have a system where a men's group is plugged into regular knowledge about political events and political happenings? And okay, well, if that's the case, then how do we do reformation, not revolution, so we can lead our people to a process that is a step by step that they can do. So it's got to start with conversation amongst the men of the church that this is important. And the next step is, I think if you want to aim small, miss small, you may have a person who is well-spoken, has some financial freedom, who wants to run for a state rep office, or the church could support them to do so, or also local offices like the city council, but you have to, okay, if we're going to think about this position and we're going to educate ourselves on how all this works, then we have to figure out how do we craft a particular message to this position or office that a person is going to run for that is principled and conservative, but also realistic with helping turn, right? So there are no doubt conservative groups out there that would love me to vote no on everything. I could vote no on the budget every single time in our state.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be it's a much, much smaller version of DC, but so I have to figure out, okay, for me personally, because, I personally made mad the local Republican establishment. Half the candidates running in the primary were paying at that time the county chairman of the Republican Party to be their campaign manager in the primary, right? It was so dirty, and so I can tell you some great hilarious stories how God we caught a guy stealing our signs, 4x8 signs. We with a private investigator and GPS tracking devices. It's crazy stuff. So if you're going to do this, you need to have covenant help and support of family and friends, not only on the functions of running a campaign, but you need people praying over you and with you and pouring into your family. But all that starts with the men actually and the pastors actually believing that this is a functional, viable method of engaging for the kingdom of Christ. Like, you have to start there. You have to believe that this is a vital calling of God.
Yeah.
That if we don't engage with this, we can sit back and I read Bob Inc. and and this is wrong and y'all are but whatever, and I've read Kuyper and but you're useless as on the bull.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're not actually how does this walk out? How do we build something? And it's going to be messy. But that's because you're dealing with 100 years of man-centered thought that has abandoned the foundations of Western civilization. So once that's done, once the men of the church and the pastor believe that this is a calling from God, then you assess the people in your church who are committed members and men of your community, and say, okay, we've got these various offices from state level down. I think DC is a waste. If we win from the state house to the courthouse, brother, it's game, set, match. DC is done for. It's just like Magna Carta, the book Lesser Magistrate by Matt Trewalla, and all the magistrates are around the king. And he's like, but he's signing it because he has to, because all the states were like, nah, we're your money, we're your army. No, we ain't doing this. Right. Yeah. So we have to readjust. To your point about federal, we have to readjust where we put our priorities. But once you realize that it's the state house to the courthouse that is the path to victory, you feel like, oh, we can do this. This is doable. Because here's the thing. Christians also have committed, passionate, communicative, loving Christians have a huge advantage. You'll knock doors. You'll talk with people. You'll pray with people. Right? You will develop wise policies that are obviously going the path of reformation, not revolution. It's doable, but it's obviously going the way that they need. And right now, there's no time like the present to take a principled stand, because people are realizing, bro, we ain't crazy no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
We look really smart.
I was really glad to.
Anyway.
Well, finish your thought. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I was just saying that I think that, to give a structured answer to your question, besides the men and the pastors believing this is vital and important, depending on the race, it would be very doable to do a 10-step plan or whatever of this, both of here's how you prepare yourself. Here's how you get your name in the community. Here's how you run a campaign, right? Those tools are now out there because there are people in this state who are having tremendous success locally and even state rep races and even a statewide race that we have won. No, more than one.
Yeah.
So those blueprints are easily, at this point, creatable. There is a certain level of money that we need. We don't need the money. My opponent, I raised $60,000 in the primary. My opponent got $300,000. Okay, like $298,000 of that was from Montgomery. I'll let you figure that out. I beat him by basically double digits, right? Which is, you beat an incumbent by 2%, 3%. That's a strong win. I beat him by basically 10%.
Wow.
So there's a path forward to win, but it's going to take a certain level of money, and then from there, it's the commitment of, here's the functional process of how we prioritize to win.
Yeah, and we do need more competent men committing to run for office at different levels in the state of Alabama. Absolutely. And I was really glad to hear you mention the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. You mentioned Matt Truella's book, and he's done great work on that. And when we talk about the importance of local politics, that's one of the things that makes localism so important, is that the way that you bring change via reformation rather than revolution is by having an intermediate magistrate lead the way, generally.
That's right.
And that's what you
That's
need.
right.
So you need,
right.
State and local level magistrates who understand the biblical purpose of civil government, who understand what God wants government at various levels to do, who are willing to stand up to tyranny when it happens above them, so to speak, and really stand up for that tyranny, to that tyranny on behalf of their people, for their people, and who understand how that should work. One of the things I wonder about is, so we live in a very conservative state. How many of our elected officials in various areas of government, how many of them understand anything about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate and the doctrine of interposition and the role they could play in standing up to tyranny when it comes from, say, the federal level?
Well, I'll tell you, they can't plead ignorance to that book, because at the end of my first session, 105 copies were placed on desk in every office in the State House.
Good for you.
And then it got mentioned from the floor by a Democrat. and then I found out that our Secretary of State was teaching that book in his Sunday school.
Well, the irony is that
I was like, that's awesome.
One of the ironies, and this is not in Alabama, but one of the ironies is that the progressives, the left, has used the doctrine of the lesser magistrate more, I think, in recent years than conservatives have, even though it's our doctrine and it flows out of a covenantal understanding of civil government. It's on the left that you've really seen it implemented with things like, say, drug laws or sanctuary cities or whatnot, where they basically just say, well, we don't like this federal law. We don't think it's just. We're not going to obey it. Okay. But conservatives, it seems like, very rarely have the guts to do something like that.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because we have ill-served pulpits.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree with you.
And so what we have to recover is a proper understanding of Romans 13. Right. And we have to say, you know what, and I'm actually writing a book right now called Make America Local Again. And one of the points that I make in the book is I have several chapters on shapes, and one is a rectangle, but it's a fence, right? And so God alone gets the big fence. So any fence that you and I have is smaller. It's a subset of the big pasture, of the big fence, as it were. And so if we don't enforce boundaries, then we're telling that civil magistrate, hey, rape, pillage, plunder, the world is yours. Do whatever the heck you want. Doesn't matter, because and that happens because, and really, that's not only is that an act of civil, social destruction. It's an act of idolatry, because it's giving to that civil magistrate God's fence, right? And so that's why I think it's so important we live in history has always been affected in controlling ways by minorities. And so that's why I believe the Church of the Lord Jesus, the portions of that vineyard that are theologically, culturally, intellectually equipped, have a tremendous opportunity Because what I have found, I believe, is that a lot of people who go to these churches that aren't maybe say as theologically and culturally and intellectually robust as we would like them to be, they're better than their pastors. Because when you begin to speak truth to them on a personal level, and over time, my district has realized I love them, and we're jumping in, fundraisers for the fire department and stuff with the schools, and I work out with the football teams, like all this stuff. I love it. That they're like, you know what? Not only do we know the message is right, but how this person, and it's not about me, I'm a sinner, but how you walk it out and you put flesh and bones to it is so powerful. And so I just feel like that we have such a tremendous opportunity, because you're gonna have to have people who have that culture of accountability, spiritual awareness. Because let me tell you, you get to Montgomery and the pressure is tangible. It is very real. My first vote was 102-3, and I was one of the 3. And I ain't gonna lie, it sucked. I did not enjoy it, but I knew I had to vote no. Now it's easier for me now. We got called into a room by leadership and had this lecture given to us by she looks like Ursula off of Little Mermaid, but she told us that we ain't nothing but wheels in a machine, and we best not clog it up. That's what we were told. And if we wanted to be anything in Montgomery, we better vote like leadership. I was so mad. I wanted to tell that woman, I don't know who you think you are and what you think I am, but you ain't Rick James, right? And I ain't your political you-know-what. I was so mad. I went and bought a 4-foot picture of Braveheart in postmodern art design and put it on my wall just for that very reason. And it's a small office, brother. When you walk into my office, it ain't nothing but me and William Wallace. So, but that happens. And that same speech was given to the previous group of people 4 years before I found out, right?
Yeah.
And so the pressure is, I have been so thankful to have an accountability group around me. Like if I became a rhino, my wife would kill me and my daddy would pee on my grave. I ain't gonna lie, that's very helpful. So and besides, that's my convictions anyway. But I've watched people of my freshman class go in there and they've changed.
Yeah.
And it does. Well, and they come up with all, I got to vote. I just got no, you don't.
Yeah.
And I get up there and me and Ben Harrison giving speeches. No, you don't have. And then what's so funny is that all these conservative groups like ALCAT, Students for Life, so they send letters. I didn't instigate that, but then you get support and you get validated from so many places. This is like on the whole gambling thing. I wasn't even aware of this, that the state executive committee, the state Republican executive committee just voted 75% to pass a resolution condemning gambling. It's like, I got the backing. I got 3/4 of the backing of the state executive, but the pressure was so, and so it's just you need that covenant community support. And what I have found is if you lead well, both in your principles and in how you walk out that servant-heartedness at the local level in your district, the people will follow. Like Braveheart, remember where he said, if you would just lead, the people would follow. He said, men don't follow titles, they follow courage.
Yeah, that's good.
And that empowers you to say, and the thing is, I'm respectful to leadership, right? And there's going to be things where me and leadership agree on, like, ballot harvesting or whatever. Not doing that. But you're going to have to oppose leadership if you're going to be faithful to your vows. And another example of how that happens, South Carolina, Riley Gaines, the swimmer, who, the whole championship thing, and she swam against a guy who said he was a girl, and they tied to the 100th of a second, whatever. So she's now an amazing political activist, speaks. She's very, very eloquent. I met her husband. He's a great guy. I love hearing her talk. They didn't realize that this is an example of how this works. So she was in the gallery in South Carolina State House. They didn't know she was up there. A bill comes to the floor that bans transgender surgery on minors, but there were no penalties attached. So it's useless. So a member of the Freedom Party brings an amendment, says we're going to punish this civilly, criminally. Well, the speaker puts pressure on the members of the Republicans, and 63 of those Republicans voted to kill the amendment. Well, she's up there. She took a picture of it, put it on Facebook, and said, primary all these Republicans. Within 20 to 30 minutes, she got a call from the Speaker of the House, said, please take your post down. She politely said, pound sand. And within 2 hours, they had reconvened and changed their votes.
Wow.
But that's the example of when you got a Wizard of Oz, that Joker, man. You got to pull the curtain back, but when you do, you are going to be under intense pressure. But the thing is, if your motivation is the glory of God, and Article 1, Section 35 of the Alabama State Constitution, which says the sole object and the only legitimate end of government is to protect the citizen and their enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. And when government becomes abusive of these ends, it is usurpation and oppression. If you live by that, and that's truly who you are, at some point the lobbyists just leave you alone. Now I talk to anybody.
They realize you can't be bought, so they just move on.
That's right. Yeah. I love that. I love people. So I talk to anybody. I talked to the Southern Poverty Law Center. They came out and opposed one of my bills. That's how I knew it was a good bill. But the thing is that they know that they already know how you're going to vote, right? So why waste their time?
Right.
And that works for the good guys too. Like Alpha knew I was against gambling. Alpha was against gambling. I got one quick phone call. Hey, buddy, just checking in, making sure. Oh yeah, I'm a no. All right, thank you, bye. So it does, to quote Hillary Clinton, it does kind of take a village. But we got to, as a church, believe that this is more important. I'll make a bold statement. The church walking into the conscious reality that there is a mission to the magistrate that actually produces us creating a ministry for this is more important right now than foreign missions.
Yeah, that's a big claim. Hey, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but walk us through where things are in our state on gambling.
Yeah, so the gambling situation, just to back up there, obviously, when it was funny how the gambling legislation was put together because it was so secretive. We, the state reps and senators, we couldn't even see it unless we went down to some secret room, no cameras, like, dark back alley. It was crazy. It was so lock and key.
Gotta love that transparency.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So when they finally dropped the bill, they were able to ramrod it through the House in the sense that all the conservative groups who wanted to take time to read it, understand it, and then give responses, they were behind the 8 ball. Now, they weren't behind the 8 ball by the time it got to the Senate, right? But, what was interesting was the whole idea of gambling was the whole messaging of gambling, which was solely driven by the Speaker of the House. I mean, he was the main driver for it. We have all these illegal gambling places and there's crime that goes on. So I'm gonna take a tough stance on crime, right? And the way to do that is we're gonna deal with illegal gambling by making it legal. So I scratched my brain on that, number one. Number two, the reality is that they wanted $1 billion they could get their hands on. So besides all of the moral issues that go with prostitution, sex trafficking, violence, and crime, even the financial argument, right? If you look at all three forms of corporate gambling, lottery, online, and casinos, at least 40 to 60% of their customer base has to operate in heavy addiction for those financial models to be viable. That creates addiction, mental health issues that we're going to be asked to pay for, the state, via you guys, us taxpayers, right? On top of that, when you spend money in like a local Dollar General, okay, or a local gas station, it's estimated that money circulates in your county 5 to 7 times before it leaves the county.
Right.
And every place it stops, it creates local taxes and jobs. You drop money into 3 forms of corporate gambling, brother, that money's gone.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say there's all kinds of reasons why moral, financial, it's all bad. There's no good side to this. But where it's at right now is I think it's a very positive sign that just recently the state executive committee of the Republican Party of Alabama by 75% voted a resolution condemning gambling. And so I think it's the mercy of God. It's the mercy of God that it's in our constitutionally, it's banned, right? And I made this point from the floor of the House. I said, it's funny that all of a sudden now, the people want it. The people, you're so consumed with the voice of the people. Why didn't we run a statewide poll on the gas tax?
Yeah, really.
And base our because you knew why. We all know why, right? Because the voice of the people matters when they're a functional obstacle to you getting your hands on centralized money, right? So I think that gambling was so costly. Like so many good bills died because the House and the Senate were arm wrestling, to be honest. I think that it was a political nightmare, and so we got up and spoke against it. Ben did. I think that gambling, I at this point, I tend to think it won't come back up this next session. And I don't think it'll come up the session before an election. I think you're most likely to see a tax increase or a gambling push in the first or second session of a 4-year term, because they understand. I mean, the one thing a politician loves above everything else is getting reelected.
Right, and that gives the voters longer to forget what was done to them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. 100%. I mean, political Alzheimer's is a thing.
For sure.
But that's where, again, I just want to encourage the church. Like, we need to. I would love to have. Here's a conference idea. If we had a conference that was simply on how to inform, engage, and empower churches to walk out a mission to the magistrate. Here's where you go to find out what money they've received. Here's where you go to find the voting record. Here's where you go to get a plan for city council, running for city council, running for state rep. Here's what it will take from your family. Here's what it will take from your church community. I mean, that would be tremendously powerful and I think helpful, because it's going to take that kind of intentional, spiritual warfare to right the ship.
Yeah. So Larson, when are you going to run? When are you running for office?
Yeah, when I get all this extra time that I've been wasting. Listen, man, I'm sitting here, doing the math, on the back of the envelope, trying to figure out. I think that there's a need for more folks to get involved, and I think I love the idea that people who have some business success are able to get themselves to a place to where they have the ability to serve. They've also proven their competence to get things done, and lead. And so, I'm looking to those people especially, and I think there's people like that in our communities, and especially folks that, when you've got kids that are a little bit older and maybe, out of the home, and you're kind of out of that stage. Look, I'm going to turn it back on you, Rich. I feel like you fit the bill probably better than I do, man. And you're
well, I will say I've got kids 15 down to 4. And that's now. They were younger 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So I would just say that on the one hand, absolutely people who've got less hindrances, there's wisdom there. Yeah. I would just balance that with saying, don't forget the other quote from The Patriot, where the general said to the swamp fox, Mel Gibson, Benjamin Martin, he said, wars are not fought by childless men only.
Yeah, for sure.
And so in some ways, I will be honest with you, like, that's been thrown in my face by some of the rhinos. Well, you probably should have waited till. I was like, you know what? No, actually, I think I ran because I've got kids.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's all about what's God's calling for you, right? And obviously, there are different, depending on what you run for, city council, mayor, county commissioner, superintendent, or state rep, those are going to have different levels of demands on your life and time, that look very different.
Well, that's what I'm interested in. I mean, I think as part of that conference, or part of that men's group, and mapping out a strategy. I mean, I think looking at the financial implications of service in different offices, right, and the time commitments involved, and just looking at, there are some of us in different stages that have a little bit more bandwidth or have a little bit more time or don't, but plotting that out, figuring it out, getting a plan together, and dividing and conquering. I mean, I think Rich made a really good point earlier that our opposition is so much better organized, it seems, than we are. It seems like I don't understand why it is that way. I think part of it perhaps is the fact that we trust God, and we don't have this sort of terror and fear about the future. I think that maybe can create a little bit of complacency, probably. But I mean, just even the debate the other night, I was shocked by how ill prepared it seemed, Donald Trump was relative to Kamala. I mean, I felt like Kamala showed up ready to throw down, and she had a strategy, and she had her talking points, and her.
There is a ABC whistleblower that's prepared to come out now that she had the questions beforehand, and that each of the moderators were paid $1 million each to fact check. Anyway, so we'll see how that unfolds.
It was 3-on-1 for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, the reality is that Trump is obviously has issues. We as conservative, reformed Christians, on some issues we wouldn't agree with Donald Trump on. Obviously, we'd much rather have him than Comrade Kamala, or whoever else, for sure. But I think, to your point, I think it's because the reason why we're not prepared is because it's not been a priority for us.
Yeah,
I think that's true.
And it has to become. I mean, my daddy he has all these sayings that like rebuke me all the time, and like, yep. So Dad always says, what 3 words do we say, son? I am responsible. But my dad says you always do your priorities.
Yeah.
You never fail to do your priority. And that's,
I think some of that, so as a pastor and having, had an interest in politics for a long time, I think some of that is what you might call pietism, not to be confused with piety, but pietism, kind of this view that
100%
is my individual Christian life. And I don't have any vision for how the Bible might apply to, cultural and political matters. And I think that's definitely been something that I would say in the church, I mean, really throughout America, but I think especially in the South, we've been very afflicted by that. And so people really are they've got a very dualistic worldview where I've got my private Christian walk, and then, publicly, my life might look very different. So you kind of operate in with a dualistic work like that. I think there's a lot of Christians
and even there when you're in office, our state house is filled with Baptists.
Yeah.
But they don't have any philosophy of like, this is the principle. Here's the blueprint. Here's how you build on the foundation that matches the blueprint, right? It's like, I mean, I want to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what are the conservative tools we have in the tool bag to promote economic growth? I mean, sometimes it feels like you might as well be looking at the backside of a donkey asking for the recipe for how to cook a beef Wellington. I mean, it's like, well, it's because that what you just said, not only does it lead to, we're getting out of here, we're going to do our own version of Tim LaHaye, Jerry B. Jenkins yoga while we wait for a beam up Scotty, but also there's been no priority of like developing thought processes of here's how you give biblical solutions to these problems, because they've never heard a sermon. I mean, the idea that a pastor wouldn't preach a sermon with just as I am at the end of it. Now, thankfully, God is at work, and that's changing. I do believe I see that, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people who are in the state house who are 20 years my senior, they think church is for people who get saved.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's not really any political discipleship taking place.
Yeah. Which is why it's incumbent upon us to raise up people who have a theology and the worldview to be like, I embrace the battle. I got guys calling me 15 years older than me who are discouraged, who have been in 2 and 3 terms. And I'm like, bro, I love it. This is amazing. Let's go. Let's pick up the fight and run. Like, what did you expect them to do? Right? We're going to win. And it's amazing to see how that even, like, it's God. I'm telling you, God is at work. God didn't raise up 1819 News for nothing. Right? God has given us a position where we have a U.S. Senator in Tommy Tuberville who's being bold and courageous, right? API is being platformed. Phil Williams Radio is being platformed. I'm telling you, Aslan is on the move, and it's incumbent upon us to be ahead of that as much as we can. And I think that, to the contrary, when we boldly put people out there who say, here's my platform, here's my principles, here's the solutions, and by the way, I'm going to walk it out in such a way that you're going to know I'm crazy about you guys. Man, it's unbeatable.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Well, you've got me and Rich all jacked up, Ernie, and hopefully as we get this out to our listeners, we'll get more people jacked up. So it's a lot of fun to speak to you, Ernie, and there's 1,000 other things we probably could get to if we had more time, but we'll be praying for you. Encourage our listeners to be praying for Ernie, and also just looking for opportunities to kind of get mobilized and get organized, because I think you're right, man. Especially here in Alabama, we've got the wind at our back. And
Ernie, is there a way for people to follow you? Are you on any social media, or do you write?
Yeah. So obviously, I'm on my website is ernieyarborough.com. Easy enough. I'm on Facebook, as State House Representative for District 7. Of course, I'm there personally as well too. On Instagram, my handle is at St. Andrews 7 for St. Andrews 7. And then I have a state rep page as well on Twitter. And so we are we're actually in the process right now of developing a whole new plan for utilizing the website and social media together that we're unrolling, God willing, by the end of this month. But that would be, the website is a good place to get a hold of me, as well as, obviously the state rep page on Facebook, and then on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Great.
But yeah, I would say, hey, if we could put together a conference on mission to the magistrate,
I love that.
Tools for how we equip the church in Alabama, make it Alabama specific, right, to win. I think that would be very powerful. And I think it's important that we develop a wise strategy that involves reformation, not revolution. Because you got to love your people enough that they know where you're going, but they can walk with you as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, thanks for your time. And Rich, it's always a pleasure, sir. Thanks for making the time here, and look forward to our next episode.
Thank you, brothers.
All right. We'll see you, man.
The God a Minute podcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy one of our other podcasts, The Good Life Podcast, featuring Matt Carpenter interviewing experts in their field about how their work contributes to the good life.